Sign this release or I will have you disbarred by Monday morning. My mother didn't say hello when I walked through the door of my grandmother's house. She didn't offer me coffee or even look me in the eye. She just slid a document across the kitchen table like she was dealing cards, tapped her finger twice on the signature line, and waited. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. Then I looked at my father standing by the back door with his arms crossed, blocking the exit like he'd rehearsed it. My brother was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of someone who already knew how this was going to end. They had clearly talked about this before I arrived. They had a plan. What they didn't know was that I had been building mine for 14 months. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and tell me what's the most calculated thing someone in your family has ever done to you for money. I read every single one. I set my bag down slowly. I pulled out the chair across from my mother, and I sat in it. My hands were flat on the table. My pulse was steady. In my line of work, the moment you let someone see your reaction is the moment you lose. Estate law is not about emotion. It is about documentation, timing, and knowing exactly which card to play, and when. The document my mother had pushed toward me was a release of inheritance rights. 43 pages. My grandmother had been gone for 11 days. I didn't reach for the pen. My mother's jaw tightened. Rachel, we have an appointment with the probate attorney at 2 o'clock. This needs to be signed before we walk in that door. And if I don't sign it, my father cleared his throat. Then we file a complaint with the state bar. Conflict of interest. You're an estate attorney who inserted yourself into your own grandmother's estate planning. That's an ethical violation. That's your license. The room was quiet except for the sound of my brother clicking through something on his phone. I looked at the release again. It was well drafted. Whoever had prepared it knew what they were doing. It would effectively remove me from my grandmother's estate entirely, waiving all rights to contest, all rights to inherit, all rights to any legal remedy going forward. In exchange, I would receive a single lump sum payment of $22,000, described in the document as a token of family appreciation. $22,000 for what my grandmother had actually left me. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked out the window at the backyard. My grandmother's rose garden was still blooming. She had planted every single one of those bushes herself, one at a time, over 40 years. She used to let me help her prune them when I was small, teaching me which branches were healthy and which ones were stealing energy from the rest of the plant. She called it necessary pruning. She said the hardest part wasn't cutting, it was knowing what to cut. I was 9 years old the first time I understood that she wasn't just talking about roses. My grandmother had been a quiet woman. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She simply watched. She watched my parents spend 30 years redirecting every conversation back to money. She watched them smile at her during holidays and then whisper in the car on the way home about what she was worth and when she might finally leave it behind. She watched them steer her toward the financial advisor they had handpicked, a man named Gary, who turned out to be my father's college roommate, and who, it would later emerge, had been charging her 3 times the market rate for 15 years. She watched all of it. And then she called me. It was 14 months ago, a Tuesday afternoon. She said she needed to talk to someone she trusted with something complicated. I drove the 4 hours without telling anyone. I sat in her kitchen, in this exact house, and she slid a folder across this exact table. Inside was a statement from her investment account, a copy of the existing will, and a handwritten list of transactions she had flagged herself over the past 2 years, transfers she hadn't authorized, fees she didn't recognize, a lien that had appeared on this property without her knowledge. My grandmother was 81 years old. She had a 10th grade education and had spent her entire adult life raising 4 children and keeping a household running on a teacher's salary. She had no formal financial training, but she had kept every statement, every receipt, and every piece of paper that had ever crossed her threshold, organized in manila folders by year, going back to 1987. She was sharper than anyone in that family had ever given her credit for. I spent 3 days in her kitchen that first visit, going through everything. What I found was not subtle. It was not complicated. It was brazen. Over 6 years, my parents had positioned themselves as informal co-managers of her finances, under the guise of helping her. They had convinced her to add my father's name to 2 accounts for emergency access. What followed was a slow, methodical bleed. Small transfers, overlapping fees, a refinance of this house that she had not fully understood, the proceeds of which had flowed into an account she had never seen. By the time I sat down with the full picture, they had moved approximately $340,000 out of my grandmother's estate. I did not call my parents. I did not confront anyone. I am an estate attorney. I know that the moment you tip your hand, documents disappear, accounts get restructured, and memories get selective. Instead, I went home. I called a colleague in probate litigation, and we started building a paper trail the right way. My grandmother updated her will with a different attorney, not mine, to avoid any appearance of conflict. She left everything to me directly. The house, the remaining investment account, a life insurance policy that had somehow survived intact because it had a beneficiary designation my father hadn't thought to change. The total value, after we'd untangled what remained, was just over $600,000. She also left me a letter. But I'll get to that. I had known for 3 months that my parents were going to contest the will. I had known for 6 weeks that they had obtained a copy of it through a contact at the attorney's office. I had known for 2 weeks that they had hired someone to prepare an alternate version, a forged codicil, dated 18 months earlier, which purported to establish a family trust and transfer all assets into it, with my parents as co-trustees. I knew all of this because my grandmother had a security system with cloud backup that she didn't mention to anyone, and because I had asked her to keep a journal of every conversation, every phone call, every visit, and every request made by anyone regarding her finances in the final year of her life. She had filled 4 notebooks. I let them think the trap was set for me. What they were actually stepping into was the one I had been building for over a year. You had 14 months to do this properly, my mother said, and her voice had taken on that smooth, reasonable tone she uses when she's trying to convince you that unreasonable things are just common sense. Your grandmother was elderly. She was confused. She was being manipulated by someone with a professional interest in her estate. That is what we are going to tell the court. Are you saying she was being manipulated by me? I'm saying a jury will hear that an estate attorney with access to a vulnerable elderly woman rewrote her will under circumstances that warrant scrutiny. And then I'm saying that same jury will look at you, a 31-year-old woman with a financial stake in the outcome, and they will have questions. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I asked, "Can I see the codicil?" My father pulled a manila folder from the counter and passed it across the table. I opened it. The document was dated March of the year before last. My grandmother's signature was at the bottom. Notarized. I recognized the notary stamp, a woman named Patricia, who had worked for Gary's financial advisory firm. I turned to the 3rd page. I read the trust language carefully. It was competent work. Not perfect, but competent. She signed this willingly, my mother said. In front of a notary. With full capacity. Whatever she told you, Rachel. She was a confused old woman who changed her mind constantly. We have witnesses. I closed the folder and set it back on the table. Here is the thing about forged documents that people who are not lawyers don't fully appreciate. The forgery itself is rarely what destroys you. What destroys you is the paper trail surrounding it. The emails, the phone calls, the people you involved, the timestamps, every favor you called in, every corner you cut, every person who knew what you were doing and didn't say no, all of it becomes a thread. And threads, when you pull them correctly, unravel everything. I had been pulling threads for 14 months. What exactly do you need from me today? I asked. Sign the release, my mother said. Take the $22,000. Let the estate pass to the trust. We are your family, Rachel. We are not your enemies. I looked at her. I had spent years trying to see the version of my mother that loved me. The version that was just flawed, just stressed, just doing her best with limited tools. Sitting in that chair, watching her smooth the edge of the forged codicil with one finger while my father blocked the door, I finally let that version go. It didn't leave with a bang. It just quietly stopped being there. I need to make a phone call, I said. My brother looked up from his phone. We said no calls until, I'm calling my client, I said. I have a closing at 4. I need to reschedule. My mother glanced at my father. He gave a small nod. Fine. Be quick. I stepped into the hallway. I did not call my client. I sent a single text message to a number I had saved under the name Plumber for the past 6 weeks. The message was 2 words. Green light. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down. Okay, I said. Let's talk about this. What followed was 40 minutes of my mother explaining, in escalating detail, all the ways she could make my professional life collapse. The bar complaint. The malpractice suit. The witnesses who would testify to my grandmother's confusion. The financial records that would show I had inserted myself into estate planning for personal gain. She was methodical. She had clearly rehearsed this. My father interjected occasionally with specific legal terms he had clearly looked up and didn't fully understand. My brother said almost nothing, which told me he either felt guilty or had been told to stay quiet, and I suspected it was the latter. I listened to all of it. I asked clarifying questions. I took notes on a yellow legal pad not because I needed to, but because I knew it would unnerve them. People who are running a con do not like it when the other person starts writing things down. At the 43-minute mark, my mother said, Rachel, stop stalling. Sign the release or this gets ugly. I set down my pen. Can I ask you something? I said. She waited. The codicil you showed me, Patricia notarized it on March 14th of last year, correct? That's correct. And grandmother signed it at Gary's office? She did. Interesting, I said. Because I have grandmother's medical records showing she was admitted to St. Catherine's Hospital on March 12th with a urinary tract infection that caused acute delirium. She wasn't discharged until March 19th. She wasn't home on March 14th. She wasn't anywhere near Gary's office. The kitchen was very quiet. Those records, I continued, along with the hospital's visitor logs, her physician's affidavit, and a statement from the attending nurse, were filed with the probate court at 9:15 this morning. My colleague handled it. I've been here with you. My mother's hand, which had been resting on the folder, went very still. Additionally, I said, keeping my voice at the same even pace. Patricia's notary commission was suspended in February of last year, following a complaint filed by a different client. She was not legally authorized to notarize anything on March 14th. That documentation was also filed this morning. My father pushed off the wall. You can't just... I also filed the financial analysis, I said. 14 months of bank records, wire transfers, and account statements documenting $342,000 moved out of grandmother's accounts over 6 years. That report was prepared by a certified forensic accountant who has no relationship to this family or this estate. Her credentials are attached. The DA's Financial Crimes Division received a copy at 9:30. My brother set his phone face down on the counter. The bar complaint you mentioned, you're welcome to file it. I documented every contact I had with grandmother, every communication, every decision I made to refer her to outside counsel specifically to avoid the conflict of interest you're describing. I kept records because I knew this moment was coming. I have been keeping records since the Tuesday afternoon 14 months ago when she called me and asked me to come. My mother stood up. Her chair scraped back against the tile. You set us up. I built a paper trail, I said. There's a difference. You handed me the shovel. I just decided where to dig. This is the part where I want to be honest about something. I had planned every word of that moment. I had rehearsed it. I had pictured it in the shower, on my morning runs, during the long drives back from my grandmother's house, over 14 months of quiet preparation. And I expected to feel something enormous when it arrived, relief, or triumph, or the specific satisfaction of a trap closing around the people who had spent years treating me like a line item. What I actually felt was tired, not defeated, just tired in the way you feel after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. The weight is gone, but your arms still remember it. My mother said, "We will fight this." You can, I said. Estate litigation is expensive and slow in public. The forensic accounting report will be entered into the record. Every transfer, every fee, every redirect, it will all be in writing, available to anyone who wants to read it. Gary's involvement will be scrutinized. Patricia's. Anyone else you brought in? I paused. Or you can speak with your attorney today about the difference between civil exposure and criminal exposure, and you can make a different decision. My father had not moved from the wall. He was staring at the table. The $22,000 offer, I said. I'm going to decline. I picked up my bag. I pulled out a business card, not mine, but my colleague's, the one handling the probate filing, and I set it on the table next to the forged codicil. That's who you call, I said, when you're ready to talk. I walked to the back door. My father didn't move to block it this time. I opened it myself. Rachel. My mother's voice was different now. The smooth, rehearsed quality was gone. What was underneath was something raw and harder to name. She was our mother, too. I turned around. I looked at her for a long moment. I know, I said. She knew it, too. She wrote about it. I left them with that. The letter my grandmother had left me was 4 pages, handwritten in her careful, even script, on the kind of pale blue stationery she had used my whole life. She had written it 8 months before she died, on a Sunday afternoon, alone in the house that had been her home for 41 years. She told me she was not confused. She told me she had understood, for longer than anyone knew, exactly what was happening to her finances, and exactly who was responsible. She said she had stayed quiet for years because she was afraid of losing her family entirely, and because part of her had always believed that if she waited long enough, people could change. She said she stopped believing that about 3 years before she called me. She said she chose me not because I was an attorney, but because I was the only one who had ever visited her without wanting something. Because I came on Tuesdays when there was nothing to celebrate and no audience to perform for. Because I sat with her in the garden and learned the names of the roses and never once asked what she was planning to do with the house. She said, I know what I'm asking you to carry. I know it won't be clean. I know the people who hurt me are the people you grew up calling family. That is the hardest kind of right thing. The kind that costs you something you can't get back. She said, you are the necessary pruning, sweetheart. Cut clean. Don't apologize for what has to go. I read that letter in my car in her driveway. I sat there for a long time. The probate process took 4 months. My parents retained an attorney who sent 3 letters and then went quiet when the forensic report was produced in discovery. Gary surrendered his license in the 4th month, the week before the DA's office announced it was moving forward with a fraud investigation. Patricia cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. My brother, who had not been directly involved in the financial transfers and whose primary role had been showing up when told to, was not charged with anything. He called me once, late on a Thursday night, and said very little except that he was sorry. I don't know exactly what he was sorry for. I think he may not have known either. The estate settled in my favor. The house, I kept. I am not ready to sell it. The rose garden needs work after a season of nobody tending it, and I have been going on weekends, learning as I go, trying to remember what she taught me about which branches to cut. The investment account and the life insurance proceeds I placed in a foundation. My grandmother had always wanted to fund scholarships for students at the community college where she had taken night classes in her 50s. It turns out it is not complicated to make that happen when you know the right paperwork. I handled it myself. On the day the final order was entered, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen one last time before the renovation began. The table was the same. The window looked out over the same garden. The late afternoon light came through at the same angle it always had. I thought about something she had said to me on one of those Tuesday visits, not long after I had started going through the records. We were sitting outside with coffee, and she was looking at the roses, and she said, "You know what the problem is with people who take things that don't belong to them? They never really believe they'll have to give it back. They spend all that time planning the taking. They never once plan for the returning." She paused. She sipped her coffee. "That's the gap," she said. "That's where you work." I worked the gap. It took 14 months, and a lot of yellow legal pads, and more Tuesday drives than I can count. It wasn't fast or dramatic, or particularly clean. It was documentation, and patience, and the willingness to let people believe they were winning, while the paper trail quietly told the truth. The truth always files on time. It just sometimes needs someone to do the paperwork. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you, I want you to know something. You are allowed to be strategic about it. You are allowed to be patient. You are allowed to build your case in silence and spring it in the light. That is not betrayal. That is not coldness. That is the necessary pruning. Cut clean. Don't apologize for what has to go.